As you've heard on Bridge City News, a bombshell report released even more details on foreign interference and said some MPs wittingly worked with hostile foreign governments. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, will we ever find out who these MPs are? Will they ever be named?
Well, we have to hope that they're named, because otherwise we're going into the next election being asked to cast ballots for people that may or may not. There have been plenty of parliamentarians, both MPs and senators, because while it's sitting elected MPs, there's also, they use the term parliamentarians, which tells us that there's probably a few senators in there as well. So look, we're not going to vote for senators. Some of them will thankfully retire out. But when it comes to October 2025 or sooner, if we go to the polls before that, can you imagine saying, well, I don't know, is my guy working with China or with Iran or with India against Canada? You don't want to think that about any MP. I always get upset when people think the worst of an elected official because they don't share the same party. A quarter century of covering this stuff, Hal, I find that even when I don't disagree with the person's policies, most politicians are in it for the right reasons. We have different points of view on how to fix a particular problem, but they're in it for the right reason. If you're working against Canada with a hostile foreign country, you're not in it for the right reason. You don't deserve to be in Parliament, and voters deserve to know. But so far, the Liberal government is saying no. They're refusing to do it. They're saying, well, the Hogue Commission can look at that. Well, that doesn't mean the names will be released. And they're saying, well, we don't have a perfect list of names. Well, you know who's been accused of this. You could let us know. But they've said so far, boo-hoo, get over it.
Brian, the Trudeau Liberals have been taunting Pierre Poilievre, saying he just needs to get his security clearance and then he can read the report to find out all of the details. So why hasn't he done that?
Well, if he did read the report from the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians, he wouldn't be able to do anything with it. He, as he's put it, he'd be handcuffed at that point. David McGuinty is the chair of that committee. He's done a good job, very good job considering the circumstances. Longtime Liberal MP from Ottawa South, and he's expressed the frustration at the government not providing enough information. But they've written the best report they can. They've released it. Last week he was asked, "Well, what can you tell us?" And he said, "All I can say is what is in the published report." And by the way, the government redacted a lot of things from the report. He said, "I can't say anything more than what is in there, or I will be charged criminally. I will be violating the law." So if Pierre Poilievre gets his security clearance, and the reason the Liberals keep bringing this up, by the way, is because they say, well, Poilievre he couldn't pass a security clearance. There's dark stuff in his past. None of that's true. He had security clearance while he was a cabinet minister. He'd have no problem passing one if he even has to go through one again. But if he reads the report, he can't even act on it. He could find out there's a half dozen dirty Conservative MPs in his caucus. If he acted on that, he'd be telling everyone that they were named in the report. Well, could he then face criminal charges? Yes, absolutely. So the idea that Poilievre reading this report after getting security clearance will somehow solve things. No, it'll make it harder for him to ask the government questions, to push on things, because if he reveals anything, criminally responsible. And then the idea that the party leaders can just deal with this themselves, that they can be informed and remove bad apples in their midst. Well, again, no, they would then be in violation. The Prime Minister could stand up in the House of Commons today and detail everything that he knows. He would be protected by parliamentary privilege. The public would know. We could make our own decisions and say, okay, well, here's the evidence against so-and-so. That's really bad. Or, well, I think you're misreading it. And we could decide, are we going to vote for them or not? But the way they're trying to do it now, they're treating us like mushrooms, Hal, keeping us in the dark and feeding us, you know what.
Mm-hmm. The federal government has moved ahead with their capital gains tax changes, Brian. This despite speculation that they would maybe make some changes to offer carve-outs for some, including doctors. That hasn't happened yet. Now, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland offered warnings of what would happen if this tax does not pass. What is she saying?
She was at a news conference on Sunday in Toronto announcing this and describing everything in the darkest terms. I mean, she said that democracy was at stake if this capital gains tax change doesn't happen. She described a future where the well-off have to live in gated communities with ever higher fences, using private healthcare and jets to get around because the rest of us are outside seething so much with red hot anger. I mean, she made it sound like people would be out with pitchforks and torches if this tax change wasn't passed. And she's also describing it as it's only affecting the uber wealthy. Just before talking to you, I got an email from the Canadian Grain Growers Association, one of many farm groups that have come out against this, along with medical associations, professional associations, basically anybody self-employed. And the Grain Growers Association says this will be a 30% tax hit on farmers who are looking to do intergenerational farm transfers. And the majority of their members in the grain growing sector of the economy, and whether it's in Saskatchewan, Alberta, or Ontario, Manitoba, the major places that this is an issue, the majority of those farms are family owned. They're not corporate farms. And about 40% of farmers are nearing retirement and want to pass on the land. What happens? They're going to take a 30% hit because of these tax changes. Doctors are warning about, retiring, cutting back their practices, or relocating. This is horrible policy that's just about trying to show up the conservatives. This is partisan tax policy that's going to be detrimental for the economy.
And Pierre Poilievre has finally come out and said that he's opposed to the tax changes. This is apparently what the Liberals wanted, Brian. Poilievre stayed quiet for a couple of months, but what is he saying now?
He's come out with a very strong opposition to it, and he's lined up a lot of the groups who I've mentioned and many that I haven't, including Canadian Federation of Independent Business. They represent small businesses. They're trying to show that this hits a lot of people. It's not the uber wealthy. The way, corporations have a really bad name in official Ottawa right now. Even though corporations are often your family doctor or the family farm or your dry cleaner or your restaurant owner, they're all incorporated. So those guys are taking the biggest hit if you're incorporated. And then for the rest, the Trudeau Liberals are trying to make it sound like this only hurts a very small group of people. Basically, Galen Weston, who's become persona non grata. He's the personification of evil in official Ottawa because he's wealthy. This is not who it's going to hit. And so Poilievre is showing with all of these groups why this is bad for the Canadian economy, how it's going to hurt innovation, it's going to hurt job creation. And quite frankly, I don't think it's going to generate the revenue that they think. Every time that the Trudeau Liberals have said, we're just going to go after the wealthy, it hasn't brought out the returns that they expected. The reason is we don't have a lot of super wealthy here in Canada. And the super wealthy, they've got the accountants and the lawyers to move money around. This is going to hit small and medium-sized businesses that are family-owned. It's going to hit family healthcare at a time when we really can't afford to be losing any doctors.
And impacting our farmers, as you mentioned. Brian, the Trudeau government was boasting about its record on gun crime recently. Now, you looked at the statistics, and apparently those stats show that they don't really have a good record.
No, they don't. And it's one of these things where the Trudeau Liberals like to make announcements, and the announcement is the policy. And you say, well, what about the results? Well, I announced that I was doing this. Isn't that good enough? No, it's not. So Marcy Ian is my MP. She's the MP for Toronto Centre, former CTV on-air personality. And she was the one that I spotted, and I thought, doesn't she know that in her own city there was a horrific week of gun violence? And by the way, it wasn't caused by duck hunters and sport shooters. There were drive-by shootings. A 14-year-old boy shot coming out of his apartment. Two men after an old-timer soccer game on a Sunday night. Two men were gunned down after two guys jumped out of an SUV and fired more than 50 shots at the group of guys just relaxing after the game. This is what's going on in her own city. But across the country, violent crime is up, gun crime is up. We're seeing carjackings in parts of this country. Do you remember when carjacking with a gun being pointed at you was something that we thought of in LA? Hey, this doesn't happen in Canada. Ooh, I don't want to go to Los Angeles. You might get carjacked with a gun. That's happening in Canada right now. And the Trudeau Liberals, their only reaction has been to make life more difficult for hunters and sport shooters while making life easier for gangsters with guns. They've lessened the sentences. They've made bail automatic, except in the most extreme circumstances. Even their recent bail reform, most people still get automatic bail with the least onerous conditions. This is a government that isn't serious on this issue, but wants to play it up and use it as a wedge issue. And if you're not with them, then you're bringing in American style gun control. Absolute garbage.
It appears as though the Trudeau government is making it a little easier to come to Canada, offering anyone who comes to work as a caregiver be given permanent residency. Now, there are reports that they're also giving faster work permits to asylum seekers.
And both of these, Hal, are going to be used and abused. Look, I understand, especially here in Ontario, where the majority of asylum seekers of late have been coming, and it's a strain on the social service system. Premier Ford has been saying, well, let them work, and then they're not on welfare, they're not going to food banks. Let them get a job. But what this will do is incentivize people to say, well, I'm going to Canada to declare asylum. I'll claim I'm a refugee. There are large groups coming from certain countries where 70, 80% or more are rejected because they're not real refugees. They're economic migrants that are using our system to jump the queue. Now they get to hear, oh, if I do that like my friend did, I get to work as well. That's going to increase the number of asylum seekers. Secondly, on the caregiver side, there are already videos being put out on websites and social media by the immigration consultants telling people, hey, you can use this caregiver program to bring your brother, your sister into Canada. You can get your family here, do family reunification quicker by saying they're coming to look after your kids. Um, this again is being used and abused. And the Trudeau Liberals don't know what to do on immigration. We've added 600,000 people to this country in the last 6 months. That's all immigration. That is not birth rate. We have a below replacement level birth rate. 600,000 people since December 19th. That's untenable. Even the PM says we're bringing in people faster than we can absorb them.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Brian, was in Calgary recently for the meeting of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Now, there was a point where Trudeau was booed, and then he, kind of kicked back, relaxed, and laughed at the audience?
Yeah, he was asked a question about the ballooning debt, the deficits, the fact that he's added $1 trillion to our debt since coming to office, and when are you going to balance the budget? And Trudeau went on this long rant about how great the Canadian economy is doing at a macro level. I mean, the rest of us are dealing with rising unemployment, housing affordability crisis, food affordability crisis. Uh, the economy for the average person is not doing as well as it used to, and he wants to point to a number or a study from an international group. That's not going to sit well with Canadians. Telling them they've never had it so good while things are going badly, um, it doesn't work. But at the end of the answer, yeah, he went on about the carbon tax and made his claim that 8 out of 10 people are better off with the carbon tax. That's been proven false when you factor in all the extras that are added onto it. But Trudeau will never admit that. And he denies the existence of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on that. So he just said, and you're better off with my carbon tax, sat back. The audience starts booing, and he lets out a cackle. Who cackles? Who laughs while they're getting booed by an audience? And the FCM is, it's city councilors, it's mayors across the country. City councils are used as recruitment grounds for Liberal politicians at the provincial and federal level. This is normally very friendly territory for him, and he got booed.
Brian, a by-election is taking place in Toronto to replace former Liberal cabinet minister Carolyn Bennett. Now, this has been a Liberal stronghold in the past. Any chance the Tories can maybe sweep in and steal the seat?
I don't see it happening. It's close, and I've talked to Liberals who live in the riding who are upset and have voted either for the NDP or the Conservatives, but it's been a Liberal stronghold since 1993. The last Conservative to win it was Barbara McDougall. She won in 1984 and 1988 with Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's sweep. So maybe there's an outside chance. And if they put in a lot of resources and effort from the conservative side into getting out the vote, then they've got a shot. Um, they they've got a guy running named Don Stewart. He's up against Chrystia Freeland's former chief of staff, Leslie Church, longtime player in the Liberal Party. So there's two good candidates out there for people to decide on. Um, I will say that provincially, the Liberals thought that they would win this one at the Ontario legislature. It went to the NDP. So, cross your fingers if you want to see a change. But if that riding goes from the Liberal column into the Conservative one, it won't go to the NDP federally. But if it goes Conservative, there are people who've said that Justin Trudeau will have to resign the next day because that's an indication of how bad things are. So maybe, if it goes, maybe that's the telltale sign that there will be a conservative sweep like Mulroney had in 84 and 88. But I wouldn't be putting money on it on BetMGM or any of these online betting apps just yet.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.